My pick-me friend constantly puts me down in front of my boyfriend while pretending she was just one of the guys. I made her realize that she picked the wrong target. She'd show up to our dates uninvited, saying Nathan had texted her to join because he needed a break from couple intensity and preferred hanging with someone chill. She'd sit between us at movies and lean on Nathan's shoulder while saying she wasn't like other girls who got jealous about physical contact between friends. She'd order beer and wings when I ordered salad, then loudly announce that she loved how she could eat real food instead of pretending to like rabbit food for male attention, even though I genuinely preferred salad. When Nathan complimented my dress, Zoe would say she could never wear something so high maintenance and preferred clothes she could actually move in while doing an unnecessary cartwheel in her shorts. She'd interrupt our conversations to challenge Nathan to video game competitions, then gloat that she was the only girl who could beat him, while I didn't even know how to hold a controller properly. She constantly told Nathan how lucky he was to have a female friend who didn't get emotional about everything and could take jokes without crying like his girlfriend did whenever he was mean. I'd never cried in front of Nathan, but Zoe created this narrative that I was oversensitive while she was the cool girl who understood men. At Nathan's birthday party, Zoe gave him concert tickets for just the two of them, saying girlfriends never appreciated good music anyway, and she knew I'd just complain about the noise. She announced to everyone that she'd gotten Nathan the perfect gift because she actually paid attention to his interests, unlike some people who just bought generic cologne. She spent the entire party sitting on Nathan's lap claiming all the chairs were taken, even though there were empty seats everywhere. When I tried to give Nathan his actual gift, Zoe grabbed it first and opened it herself, declaring the watch I'd saved for was nice but boring compared to an actual experience with someone fun. She then challenged all the guys to shots and made fun of me for only drinking wine like a typical basic girl who couldn't handle real alcohol. When I confronted Zoe about her behavior, she said I was being exactly the kind of dramatic girlfriend that made guys prefer hanging with girls like her who kept things simple. She said Nathan clearly enjoyed having a female friend who didn't make everything about romance and jealousy. She actually said she felt sorry for Nathan being stuck with someone so insecure that I couldn't handle him having a cool female friend. She said guys like Nathan needed breaks from clingy girlfriends, and she was providing a service by being his escape from relationship drama. That's when I decided to show Zoe exactly who she was dealing with. I started by befriending her crush Alex, who she'd been trying to impress for months with her pick-me behavior. I invited Alex to group hangouts and acted like the ultimate cool girl around him, but better than Zoe. I'd laugh at his dumb jokes louder than her, drink more shots than her, and beat his high scores in games she couldn't even play. I'd casually mention how some girls tried so hard to be one of the guys that it became desperate and embarrassing while looking directly at Zoe. Alex started following me around asking why all girls couldn't be as chill as me. Next, I organized a girls' night and invited everyone except Zoe, then posted about how amazing it was to have female friends who supported each other instead of competing for male attention. When Zoe saw the posts, she texted asking why she wasn't invited, and I replied that it was for girls who actually liked being girls, not pick-me's who thought femininity was weakness. All our mutual friends started recognizing Zoe's behavior and calling her out for constantly putting other women down to seem special. The real satisfaction came when I threw a party and specifically told everyone it was a couples and singles event, where people should bring their boyfriends or come alone ready to mingle. Zoe showed up expecting to hang all over Nathan, but I'd already warned him about her game. I watched Zoe's face change when Nathan put his arm around me and said we needed to leave soon for our early morning plans. Her smile got tight around the edges, and she tried to act normal by suggesting the three of us should grab breakfast together tomorrow. Nathan told her we already had plans without even glancing at me for permission, and I felt something shift in my chest because he was finally setting boundaries without me having to ask. Zoe's eyes darted between us, and she laughed too loud while saying she was just trying to be friendly, but nobody was buying it anymore. Heather appeared next to me near the kitchen and touched my elbow, pulling me away from the group. She leaned in close and admitted she'd been watching Zoe put me down for months, but kept thinking maybe she was reading too much into it. Watching Zoe tonight made everything click into place for her, and she asked if I was okay dealing with this constantly. I told her honestly that it had been wearing me down, but I was handling it, and Heather squeezed my hand while saying she wished she'd spoken up sooner. We rejoined the party, and I noticed other people were treating Zoe differently now, keeping more distance and not laughing at her jokes the same way. The next morning, Nathan and I went to brunch at this place near campus that makes amazing pancakes. He brought up Zoe before I could even mention her, saying Julian had texted him that she seemed really upset when we left the party. Nathan pushed his food around his plate and admitted he'd been trying to be nice because Zoe didn't have many close friends, but he was starting to see how differently she acted toward me when he was around. I wanted to unload everything I'd been feeling for months, but I stopped myself because Nathan needed to figure this out on his own, not because I pushed him into it. Instead, I reached across the table and held his hand, telling him I appreciated him noticing, and that we could talk about it more when he was ready. We spent the rest of brunch talking about other stuff and laughing at stupid memes on his phone, and it felt good to just be us without Zoe's shadow hanging over everything. I made a choice right then not to bring up Zoe again unless Nathan did first, because I wanted him to see the problem clearly without feeling like I was making him choose sides. 3 days passed, and my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe asking if I was mad at her. She said things felt weird between us, and she didn't understand why there was tension. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing back that everything was fine, and we should all hang out soon. My roommate Kavya looked over my shoulder and raised her eyebrows, asking if I was really going to pretend nothing happened. I told her I had a plan, and sometimes the best way to win was to let people think you weren't playing. Zoe sent back 3 happy emojis and said she was so glad we were cool, and I put my phone down feeling slightly sick about how fake we were both being. Tuesday afternoon, I stopped at the campus coffee shop to grab something between classes, and saw Alex sitting alone at a corner table with his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. I walked over and asked what he was working on, and his whole face lit up when he started explaining his engineering project about renewable energy systems. Most people's eyes glazed over when Alex talked about his work, but I actually found it interesting, so I pulled up a chair and asked real questions about the technical parts. 20 minutes flew by while we talked, and I made sure to laugh when he made jokes about his professor's weird grading system. Alex seemed surprised that I cared about what he was doing instead of just pretending to listen, and I could tell Zoe had never shown this kind of genuine interest. He told me about the problems he was running into with his calculations, and I suggested he talk to Professor Finley, who taught my statistics class, and Alex grabbed his phone to write down her office hours. When I finally had to leave for class, Alex thanked me for the advice and said it was really cool talking to someone who actually got what he was trying to do. Thursday morning, Alex texted me that he was going to a study group at the library that night if I wanted to stop by. I wrote back casually that I might come since I needed to work on my psychology paper anyway. His response came back fast, saying he'd text me the room number and he hoped I could make it. I could picture Zoe's face if she knew Alex was inviting me to study with him, and part of me felt guilty for using him this way, but another part remembered every time Zoe had made me feel small. That evening, I picked out jeans and a comfortable sweater. Nothing too fancy, but I made sure I looked good. I stopped at the store and grabbed bags of chips and cookies to bring for the group, the kind of thoughtful thing Zoe would never do because she was too busy trying to prove she was one of the guys. The study room was on the 3rd floor, and I could hear voices through the door before I knocked. Alex jumped up to let me in and introduced me to his 3 friends who were all working on different projects. I put the snacks in the middle of the table and everyone thanked me before diving in. For the next hour, I actually worked on my paper while listening to their conversations about classes and professors and weekend plans. When they asked my opinion, I gave it, and when they made jokes, I laughed if they were funny, and the whole thing felt natural instead of forced. Alex kept glancing over at me with this small smile like he was happy I'd come, and I started to wonder if maybe I actually liked hanging out with him beyond just my plan to get back at Zoe. The door opened without anyone knocking, and Zoe walked in wearing shorts and a tank top even though it was cold outside. She looked around the room and her eyes landed on me sitting next to Alex, and I watched her whole body tense up. Zoe immediately started talking loud about how she'd heard there was a study group and decided to crash it, and she pulled a chair right up next to Alex's other side. She asked him to explain some concept from their shared engineering class, and he started answering, but she kept interrupting to show off that she knew related information. Alex's friends exchanged looks and went back to their own work, while Zoe kept trying to prove she was the smartest person in the room. I stayed quiet and focused on typing my paper, occasionally reaching for a chip or asking one of the other guys a question about their project. Every few minutes, I felt Alex look over at me instead of at Zoe, who was practically leaning across him to point at things in his textbook. She challenged him to quiz her on formulas, and he did it half-heartedly while his friends started packing up their stuff earlier than planned. Zoe didn't seem to notice she was clearing the room with her desperate energy, but I caught Alex glancing at me with this tired expression that looked a lot like relief. After everyone else left, Alex suggested we should probably head out too since the library would close soon. Zoe said she'd walk out with us, but Alex told her he was going to walk me back to my dorm since it was late. Her mouth opened and closed, and she muttered something about having to go the other direction anyway before leaving ahead of us. Alex and I walked slowly across campus, and he thanked me for bringing snacks and being cool to talk to. He said it was nice hanging out with someone who didn't turn everything into a competition, and he didn't say Zoe's name, but we both knew exactly who he meant. I told him his project was genuinely interesting, and I'd love to hear how it turned out, and he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime to talk more about it. We reached my building and exchanged numbers, and I went upstairs feeling like my plan was working, but also feeling weird about whether I actually liked Alex, or if I was just using him to hurt Zoe. I opened my phone and pulled up my texts with Heather, my fingers moving fast across the screen. I asked if she wanted to organize a girls' night this weekend with some of our friends, and she responded within minutes saying she was totally in. We went back and forth planning a movie night at her apartment with wine and takeout, and I started creating a group chat with Heather, Kavya, and 3 other girls from our friend group. I deliberately scrolled past Zoe's name in my contacts and didn't add her to the chat. Nobody asked why she wasn't included, and I felt a small rush of satisfaction knowing our whole group had noticed her behavior, even if nobody said it out loud. Friday night arrived, and I showed up at Heather's apartment with 2 bottles of wine and my favorite blanket. The apartment smelled like pizza and popcorn, and everyone was already spread across the couch and floor in comfortable clothes. We started the first movie, but nobody really watched it because we kept pausing to talk and laugh about random things. Kavya mentioned halfway through the night how exhausting it was being around people who constantly put other women down, and the room went quiet for a second. Heather agreed immediately and said she'd been thinking the same thing lately. Another girl named Maya shared a story about a friend from high school who used to do the same pick-me stuff, and how draining it was to be around. Everyone started sharing their own experiences with girls who competed instead of supported, and I realized our whole friend group had been quietly noticing Zoe's pattern for months. Nobody said her name directly, but we all knew exactly who we were talking about. The conversation felt good and real instead of fake, and I remembered why I actually liked hanging out with these girls. Heather grabbed her phone and suggested we take a group photo to remember the night. She said we should post it with a caption about supporting your female friends, and everyone agreed. I hesitated for just a second, thinking about how Zoe would feel seeing it, but then I remembered her sitting on Nathan's lap at his birthday party and telling everyone I bought boring gifts. I remembered every time she made me feel small in front of my boyfriend, and I told Heather the caption sounded perfect. We squeezed together on the couch and took several photos until we got one where everyone looked good. Heather typed out the caption about real friends lifting each other up and tagged everyone in the photo before hitting post. My phone buzzed less than an hour later with a text from Zoe asking why she wasn't invited to girls' night. She said she thought we were all friends, and she didn't understand what was going on. I stared at the message for a minute before typing back that it was specifically for girls who lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. I added a thinking face emoji at the end to make it completely clear I was calling out her behavior. My phone started ringing immediately with her name flashing across the screen. I let it go to voicemail and kept talking to the girls around me. A few minutes later, I checked the voicemail and listened to Zoe's defensive, angry voice claiming I was being a jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle Nathan having female friends. She said I was trying to turn everyone against her for no reason, and she didn't deserve to be treated like this. I screenshot the voicemail transcript where she specifically called me a jealous girlfriend and sent it to Heather with a caption saying this was exactly the problem we'd been talking about. Heather showed it to Maya and another girl from the group, and suddenly everyone was agreeing that Zoe's pattern of putting me down had gone too far. The consensus formed quickly once people felt permission to acknowledge what they'd been noticing. Nathan texted me during our date night 2 days later asking about the social media post he'd seen. We were sitting at our favorite restaurant and I could tell he'd been thinking about how to bring it up. I explained honestly that Zoe had been making me feel bad about myself for months, and I needed time with friends who actually supported me instead of competed with me. I watched his face shift from confused to uncomfortable as he processed what I was saying. He admitted he'd been noticing things too, like how Zoe always had to mention she wasn't like other girls, or how she put me down in ways that seemed like jokes but really weren't. He apologized for not speaking up sooner and said he didn't realize how much her behavior was affecting me. I felt relief wash over me knowing Nathan was finally seeing what I'd been dealing with. He reached across the table and took my hand, and promised to be more aware going forward. Alex started texting me more frequently over the next few days, sending memes and asking my opinion on music. I responded enthusiastically to everything and made sure our conversations felt fun and easy. I knew Zoe could probably see him online and active, but not messaging her, and the thought made me feel vindictive and guilty at the same time. I invited Alex to join Nathan and me for lunch with Julian at the campus food court, and he accepted right away. We met up on Tuesday, and I made sure to include Alex in conversations naturally, while also being affectionate with Nathan, so everyone understood the boundaries. Alex seemed relaxed and happy just talking about normal things without anyone trying to prove anything. I could tell he appreciated being treated like a person instead of a prize to be won. Julian mentioned later when Alex went to get napkins that Alex had told him I was really cool, and asked if Nathan minded him hanging out with us. Nathan apparently said he was glad I was making friends with his friends, and the comment made me feel weird. Part of me felt good that my plan was working, but another part felt guilty about my actual motivations for befriending Alex in the first place. I tried to shake off the weird feeling by focusing on the rest of lunch with Alex. He talked about his engineering project, and I asked questions that showed I actually cared about the answers. Nathan kept his hand on my knee under the table, and I could tell he noticed how different this felt from when Zoe forced herself into our conversations. Alex mentioned he had to head to his afternoon lab and thanked us for inviting him to join. Nathan walked him partway to the engineering building while I stayed behind to throw away our trash. Julian caught up with me at the trash cans and pulled me aside near the bike racks. He said Alex had texted him earlier asking if Nathan was cool with him hanging out with us more. Julian showed me the message on his phone where Alex said I was really cool and easy to talk to, unlike some people who made everything weird. Nathan apparently told Alex he was glad I was making friends with his friends and thought it was good for the group dynamic. Julian looked at me with this knowing expression and asked if I was actually trying to be friends with Alex, or if something else was going on. I felt my face get hot and told him I genuinely liked talking to Alex, but I also wouldn't mind if Zoe noticed he preferred spending time with people who treated him like a person. Julian nodded slowly and said he got it, but warned me to be careful because using people as revenge tools usually backfired on everyone involved. I appreciated his honesty even though it made me feel guilty about my motivations. 2 days passed before Zoe made her move. I walked out of my psychology class Thursday afternoon and found her waiting by the building entrance with her arms crossed. She stepped directly into my path and asked why I was suddenly all over Alex. Her voice was loud enough that other students glanced over as they walked past. I kept my expression calm and told her I was just being friendly since Alex was part of our group. She moved closer and said I knew exactly what I was doing, and she wanted to know why I was trying to steal someone she'd been interested in for months. I pointed out that being interested in someone didn't give her ownership of them, and if she had a problem with Alex having other friends, maybe she should think about why she felt so threatened. Her face went red and she said this wasn't about feeling threatened. It was about me being manipulative and using Alex to get back at her. I felt my heart racing, but kept my voice steady as I told her it was interesting she recognized manipulative behavior when someone else did it. She demanded to know what that meant, and I said constantly putting me down to seem cool to Nathan was pretty manipulative too. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I watched her face shift from angry to defensive as she realized I wasn't backing down this time. She recovered quickly and accused me of being a hypocrite who was now doing the exact same thing to her. I told her there was a difference between befriending someone genuinely and using someone as a prop to make yourself look better. She said I was lying to myself if I thought my sudden interest in Alex was genuine, and everyone could see through it. Her voice kept getting louder, and I noticed more students stopping to watch our argument. A few people had their phones out, and I realized this was becoming a public scene. She pointed her finger at my chest and said I was trying to steal Alex away from her even though they were never together. I stepped back from her finger and said that was exactly my point about not owning people. She called me a fake friend who pretended to be nice while secretly being jealous and insecure. I felt anger rise in my throat and told her I'd been nothing but nice to her for months while she made me feel bad about myself in my own relationship. She laughed this bitter sound and said if I felt bad, it was because I knew deep down Nathan preferred hanging out with her. That crossed a line, and I told her Nathan had been noticing her behavior too, and he was starting to see how she treated me when she thought she could get away with it. Her face went pale and then bright red again as she realized Nathan might actually be aware of what she'd been doing. The small crowd of watching students had grown bigger, and people were definitely recording now. Zoe looked around and seemed to notice everyone staring for the first time. She called me a manipulative liar one more time and then stormed off toward the parking lot. I stood there trying to catch my breath while my hands shook from the adrenaline. 2 girls from my psychology class approached me once Zoe was gone. The taller one with curly hair said she'd been in situations with pick-me girls before, and she was glad I stood up for myself. The other girl agreed and mentioned she'd noticed Zoe's behavior at a party last semester, where Zoe spent the whole night putting down other girls while trying to impress guys. They both said they respected me for calling it out instead of just taking it. I thanked them, but felt this weird mix of satisfaction and nausea about what just happened. Part of me felt good about finally confronting Zoe directly, but another part felt sick about doing it so publicly, where everyone could watch and judge. I walked back to my dorm in a daze and found Kavya studying at her desk. She took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told her about the confrontation with Zoe outside my class, and how it turned into this public argument with people recording. Kavya closed her laptop and gave me a hug without saying anything for a minute. Then she pulled back and said she was proud of me for setting boundaries and not letting Zoe walk all over me anymore. But she also asked if I was okay with how intense things were getting between us. I admitted I felt vindicated but also kind of gross about the whole thing becoming such a public spectacle. Kavya said that made sense and it showed I wasn't just being cruel for fun. She pointed out that standing up for yourself and enjoying someone else's humiliation were 2 different things. I sat on my bed and tried to process everything while Kavya made us both tea. She asked if I thought this would make things better or worse with Zoe, and I honestly didn't know. Part of me hoped Zoe would finally back off, but another part worried she'd just get more aggressive. My phone rang around 7 that evening and Nathan's name flashed on the screen. I answered and he immediately asked if I was okay because Zoe had texted him claiming I attacked her unprovoked on campus. He said he knew that wasn't true based on everything he'd seen lately, but he wanted to hear my version. I explained the whole confrontation, including how Zoe cornered me after class and escalated things with her accusations. Nathan listened quietly and then said he believed me completely. But he also said he was worried about me getting caught up in drama that might not be worth my energy. I felt frustration rise because it sounded like he was still somewhat defending Zoe by suggesting I should just ignore her. I told him ignoring her hadn't worked for months while she made me feel bad in my own relationship. He was quiet for a second, and then apologized for making it sound like this was my fault. He said he just didn't want me to waste emotional energy on someone who clearly wasn't worth it. I appreciated his concern but explained that setting boundaries wasn't wasting energy. It was protecting myself. He agreed and said he'd talk to Zoe about backing off completely. I was still on the phone with Nathan when he got another call and said it was Julian. He asked if he could call me back in a few minutes. I said sure and hung up feeling anxious about what Julian might be saying. Nathan called back 20 minutes later and his whole tone had changed. He said Julian told him Zoe had been inappropriate for a while, and most of their friend group had noticed, but nobody wanted to cause drama by bringing it up. Julian apparently mentioned that Zoe made similar comments about his girlfriend last year before they broke up. Julian's girlfriend had complained about Zoe constantly putting her down and making her feel unwelcome in the friend group. Julian admitted he hadn't taken it seriously enough at the time and felt bad about that now. Nathan sounded genuinely shocked as he told me this because he'd had no idea Zoe had done this before. He apologized again for not seeing the pattern sooner and said he should have listened when I first tried to tell him how Zoe's behavior was affecting me. I felt relief wash over me knowing Nathan finally understood this wasn't just me being dramatic or jealous. He said he was going to have a serious conversation with Zoe about respecting boundaries, and if she couldn't do that, she wouldn't be welcome around us anymore. The next few days showed a clear shift in our friend group dynamics. Heather organized a movie night at her apartment for that weekend, and I watched the group chat carefully. 3 different people asked if Zoe would be there before they committed to coming. Heather handled it smoothly by saying it was just going to be a small group of close friends, and left it at that. Nobody explicitly said they didn't want Zoe there, but the implication was obvious. Maya texted me privately and said she'd been feeling uncomfortable around Zoe for months, but thought she was being too sensitive. She said watching me stand up to Zoe gave her permission to acknowledge what she'd been noticing. Another girl from the group sent a similar message saying she appreciated me calling out behavior that made everyone uncomfortable. I started to see how Zoe's actions had affected more people than just me, but nobody felt comfortable addressing it until someone else went first. The friend group was naturally dividing, with most people gravitating away from Zoe once they felt permission to acknowledge her behavior pattern. I checked Instagram Saturday morning and saw Zoe had posted to her story. The first slide was a quote about fake friends who can't handle strong women who speak their minds. The second slide was a selfie of her looking sad with a caption about how disappointing it was when people showed their true colors. The third slide said something about how real ones knew her worth, and everyone else could stay bitter. My phone started buzzing with screenshots from different people, all sending me Zoe's story with eye roll emojis. Heather sent one with a message saying Zoe was really trying the victim narrative. Julian sent one saying he couldn't believe she was still playing the misunderstood strong woman card after everything. Even Alex sent me a screenshot with a message saying he was sorry I had to deal with this level of drama. I realized Zoe's attempt to paint herself as the victim wasn't landing the way she hoped, because too many people had finally started seeing through her act. Alex texted me Tuesday afternoon asking if I'd help him pick out a birthday gift for his sister. I agreed immediately, and we made plans to meet at the mall Thursday after his classes. Part of me felt guilty knowing I'd originally befriended him just to get back at Zoe, but another part of me was curious to see if we actually got along without all the competitive tension. Thursday came and Alex met me at the main entrance wearing a hoodie and jeans, looking genuinely stressed about the gift situation. He explained his sister was turning 16, and he had no idea what teenage girls liked anymore. We wandered through stores together, and I found myself actually enjoying the conversation as he told me about his sister's interests in art and photography. I suggested a nice camera bag from the photography store, and his whole face lit up saying that was perfect. We grabbed coffee afterward and talked about his engineering projects and my psychology classes, and I realized I was having fun without performing or competing with anyone. He made a dumb joke about thermodynamics, and I laughed because it was actually funny, not because I was trying to prove anything to Zoe. The afternoon felt easy and comfortable in a way that surprised me, and I caught myself thinking Alex was actually a decent guy when he wasn't being used as a weapon in someone else's game. We were looking at camera accessories when Alex's phone buzzed for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He glanced at it and sighed, and I asked if everything was okay. He hesitated, then admitted Zoe had been texting him constantly over the past few days, asking what he was doing and who he was hanging out with. I felt my stomach twist, knowing I'd probably triggered that behavior by giving Alex attention Zoe wanted. He said her messages were getting intense, and he'd been keeping his responses short because the whole thing felt overwhelming. I watched him scroll through a string of texts from her asking if he was free, what his plans were, if he wanted to hang out, and why he wasn't responding faster. He looked genuinely uncomfortable as he explained he liked Zoe as a friend, but her constant need for attention was exhausting. I realized I might have accidentally helped him see what I'd been dealing with all along, this pattern of someone demanding all your focus and making you feel guilty for having other relationships. He said he'd started noticing how Zoe always had to be the center of attention and put other people down to make herself seem better. I felt complicated about the whole thing because I'd set out to make Zoe jealous, but ended up actually connecting with Alex and maybe helping him recognize behavior he deserved better than. That weekend, Nathan came over and we started planning the couples and singles party we'd been talking about. He suggested we host it at Julian's house since Julian had way more space and a better setup for parties. I loved the idea and immediately started working on the invitation wording. We decided to make it crystal clear what kind of event this was, so I wrote that people should bring their partner if they had one, or come ready to mingle if they were single. Nathan helped me create the event page and we made it public, so everyone in our friend group could see it. I made sure the privacy settings were open enough that Zoe would definitely come across it in her feed. We picked a date 2 weeks out and started inviting people through the event page. The responses started coming in fast, with couples confirming and single friends asking if they should bring anything. I watched the event page notifications and waited to see if Zoe would notice. Sure enough, within a few hours, she commented on the event asking if she should bring anyone or come solo. I took my time crafting my response to sound friendly and casual. I wrote back publicly that she should come however she felt comfortable, and there would be plenty of people to hang out with. My tone was perfectly pleasant, but I knew exactly what I was doing, setting up a situation where Zoe would show up expecting to monopolize Nathan's attention, only to find clear couple boundaries she couldn't cross. Nathan read my response and squeezed my hand, and I could tell we were both thinking the same thing about how this party would finally force a confrontation that had been building for months. A few days before the party, Nathan and I sat down in my dorm room for a serious conversation about boundaries. I needed to know he was actually on the same page about handling Zoe at the party. He promised he would make it completely clear through his actions that we were a couple, and he wasn't interested in Zoe's games anymore. I told him I needed him to be physically affectionate with me at the party, not in an excessive way, but enough that Zoe couldn't pretend there was any ambiguity about our relationship. Nathan agreed and said he'd been thinking a lot about how he'd let Zoe's behavior slide for too long because he didn't want to cause drama. He admitted he should have shut down her invasive behavior months ago instead of hoping she'd figure it out on her own. We talked through specific scenarios that might come up, like Zoe trying to sit between us or suggesting Nathan go somewhere alone with her. He promised he'd redirect every time and make our couple status obvious. I felt way more secure knowing we had an actual plan, and Nathan understood what I needed from him. He pulled me close and said he was sorry for not seeing how much Zoe's behavior had been hurting me. I believed him and felt like we were finally working as a team instead of me fighting this battle alone. The day before the party, Heather called me sounding concerned. She said Zoe had been telling people I was trying to publicly humiliate her, and that the whole party was designed to embarrass her in front of everyone. I felt my jaw tighten because Zoe was trying to play victim before anything had even happened. Heather asked if that was true, and I told her I was just hosting a normal party with clear boundaries about couples and singles. I said if Zoe felt humiliated by basic social boundaries, that was her issue to work through, not mine. Heather was quiet for a second, then said she understood, and she'd see me tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat on my bed feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. Part of me knew I'd been hoping for exactly this kind of confrontation. A public moment where Zoe would have to face the consequences of her behavior. I'd told myself I just wanted her to stop interfering in my relationship, but I couldn't pretend I didn't also want her to feel small the way she'd made me feel small so many times. The guilt mixed with anticipation in my stomach, and I tried to push both feelings away by focusing on party preparations. Saturday morning, I headed to Julian's house early to help set up. He'd already moved furniture around to create better flow, and I started arranging drinks and snacks in the kitchen. Julian thanked me for helping organize everything and said his house needed a good party anyway. We worked together setting up music and lighting while chatting about random stuff. I was trying to stay busy, so I wouldn't spiral into anxiety about what might happen later. Kavya showed up around noon with bags of ice and more snacks. She gave me a long look and asked if I'd thought about what I actually wanted to accomplish tonight beyond just putting Zoe in her place. I stopped arranging cups and considered her question. I admitted I wasn't totally sure anymore because my feelings were complicated. Kavya sat down on Julian's couch and patted the spot next to her. She said gently that wanting Zoe to feel small and wanting her to stop interfering in my relationship might be two different goals. She asked which one I was actually pursuing tonight. I told Kavya honestly that both goals felt tangled together in my head, and I didn't know how to separate them. She nodded and said she got it, but suggested I should be clear with myself about my real intentions. I appreciated her trying to make me think deeper about this, but I also felt defensive because Zoe had earned whatever was coming. Kavya didn't push further, and we went back to setting up the party. People started arriving around 7, and the energy felt good right away. Couples came in holding hands and greeting everyone while single friends clustered together near the drinks looking relaxed and happy. Julian had his arm around some girl he'd been seeing, and they looked comfortable together. The music was at a perfect volume for conversation, and people were mingling naturally between the living room and kitchen. I stayed close to Nathan, greeting everyone as they arrived. Alex showed up looking nice in a button-down shirt and immediately came over to say hi to Nathan and me. I introduced him to a few single friends, including this girl Maya, who I thought he might actually hit it off with. They started talking about photography, and I felt good about facilitating something genuine instead of just using Alex as a prop. Nathan kept his arm around my waist as we moved through the party, and I could feel myself starting to relax into the evening. The couples and singles dynamic was working exactly how I'd hoped, with everyone respecting the clear boundaries about who was available and who wasn't. Zoe walked in around 8 wearing a tight dress and heels that were way more dressed up than anyone else at the party. Her eyes immediately scanned the room, and I watched her locate Nathan standing with his arm around me talking to Julian. Her face did this thing where it got tight for just a second, before she forced a huge smile and started walking toward us. I felt Nathan's arm tighten slightly around my waist, and I knew he'd seen her too. My heart started beating faster as she got closer, and I reminded myself that Nathan and I had a plan. Zoe's smile looked painted on as she reached our group, and I prepared myself for whatever was about to happen next. She walked straight toward us, and I watched Nathan's arm stay firm around my waist. Zoe got close and tried to wedge herself between us like she always did, but Nathan shifted his body so I stayed tucked against his side while he smiled at her and said hello. Her eyes darted between us, and she suggested that maybe Nathan wanted to go grab drinks with her. Nathan said that sounded good and we'd all go together. He took my hand and started walking toward the kitchen with me right beside him. Zoe followed behind us, and I could feel her frustration even though I wasn't looking at her. We reached the drinks table, and Nathan kept holding my hand while he poured himself a beer. Zoe grabbed a cup and started pouring vodka while complaining loudly about how the whole party felt so couple-focused. She said she felt left out and unwelcome. Heather was standing nearby getting ice and she turned around with a big smile. Heather said that was literally the whole point of a couples and singles party. Several people standing around the kitchen laughed and agreed with Heather. Zoe's face turned red and she took a big drink from her cup. Alex walked over to our group and asked if I wanted to help him make his drink since I knew the good mixers. I started to say sure when Zoe jumped in and said she was great at making drinks. She reached for the bottles and started explaining some complicated recipe. Alex looked uncomfortable and said he'd specifically asked me because I'd mentioned a good combination last week. The rejection showed clearly on Zoe's face and she stepped back from the table. I helped Alex mix his drink and we talked about the music playing while Zoe stood there watching us. Nathan stayed close to me the whole time with his hand on my lower back. The next hour felt like watching Zoe slowly realize her usual tricks weren't working anymore. She followed Nathan around trying to get him alone, but every time she suggested they go somewhere or do something, he redirected the conversation back to the group. When she tried to pull him away to show him something on her phone, he glanced at it while staying next to me, and then turned back to finish his conversation with Julian. She attempted to start a debate about some video game, but Nathan just agreed with her point and moved on instead of engaging in the competitive banter she wanted. I watched her get more and more frustrated as nothing landed the way it used to. Her smile got tighter and her laugh got louder and more forced. She kept touching Nathan's arm or shoulder, but he'd shift away naturally without making it obvious. At one point, she suggested we all play beer pong, and Nathan said he and I were actually having fun just talking to people. Her eyes got hard when he said that, and I saw her jaw clench. Julian suggested we play couples trivia instead, where partners answered questions about each other. Nathan liked that idea and asked how well everyone thought they knew their partners. Zoe's voice cut through the room announcing that she probably knew Nathan better than I did. She said she actually paid attention to his interests instead of just pretending to care. The whole room went quiet, and I felt Nathan's body go stiff next to me. Nathan's face changed into an expression I'd never seen before. His eyes went cold and his mouth set in a hard line. He looked directly at Zoe and told her she didn't know him as well as she thought. His voice was calm but firm when he said her constant disrespect toward me and our relationship wasn't cute or funny anymore. He said he was done pretending it was okay. Zoe tried to laugh and wave her hand dismissively. She started to say she was just joking around like always, but Nathan cut her off mid-sentence. He said real friends don't constantly put down their friend's girlfriend. He added that her pick-me act was transparent and exhausting. He told her if she couldn't treat me with basic respect, then she wasn't welcome around us anymore. His words hung in the air and nobody moved or spoke. Zoe's eyes filled with tears, and she looked around the room like she was searching for someone to back her up. Everyone either looked away or stared at their drinks. A few people near Julian actually nodded in agreement with what Nathan had said. Zoe's face crumpled and she grabbed her jacket off the couch. She rushed toward the door and I heard her crying as her footsteps went down the stairs. The front door slammed and the party stayed quiet for another few seconds. I felt this rush of satisfaction flood through my chest. She'd finally faced consequences for all those months of making me feel small. But right behind that feeling came this uncomfortable twisting in my stomach that I didn't expect. People started coming up to me saying it was about time someone called her out. A few friends congratulated me or said they were glad Nathan finally said something. But I noticed some people looking concerned and whispering to each other. 2 girls from my psychology class had worried expressions, and one of them kept glancing at the door like she was thinking about going after Zoe. The party slowly started up again with conversations resuming and music getting louder, but the energy felt different now. Nathan pulled me aside into Julian's hallway and asked if I was okay. I admitted I felt weird about what just happened, even though Zoe deserved to be called out. He nodded and said he'd been wanting to say something for weeks. He explained he kept hoping she'd get the hint on her own, and he wouldn't have to make it so public. His hand squeezed mine, and he said he was sorry for not speaking up sooner. I leaned against the wall and tried to sort through the mix of emotions in my chest. Part of me felt vindicated and relieved that Nathan had finally set boundaries. But another part of me felt sick about watching Zoe cry and leave while everyone stared. I thought about how I'd deliberately planned this whole thing to humiliate her publicly. Nathan asked if I wanted to leave, and I shook my head. We went back to the party, and I tried to enjoy the rest of the evening, but I couldn't fully shake the uncomfortable feeling that had settled over everything. Julian walked over and pulled out his phone. He showed me a text from Zoe asking if everyone hated her now. His face looked torn between concern and frustration. He said he didn't know what to tell her because, yeah, her behavior had been really bad for months, but watching her leave crying made him feel weird about the whole thing. I stared at the message on his screen and felt my stomach twist harder. Part of me wanted to say she deserved it after everything she put me through. But another part of me kept seeing her face crumple right before she ran out. Julian put his phone away and squeezed my shoulder before walking back to where some other friends were standing. I realized this whole situation wasn't as simple as good guy versus bad guy like I'd been telling myself. The party kept going around me, but everything felt different now. People were laughing and talking, but the energy had this uncomfortable edge to it. Some friends kept glancing at me like they wanted to say something but weren't sure how. Others avoided looking at me completely. I tried to join conversations, but I couldn't focus on what anyone was saying. My brain kept replaying Zoe's tears, and the way everyone had just watched her leave. Alex found me standing alone near the kitchen counter about an hour later. He leaned against the wall next to me and said quietly that he hoped I wasn't feeling bad about what happened. He told me Zoe's behavior really had been out of line for a long time. His voice was gentle, but I could hear the discomfort underneath it. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I thanked him and tried to smile, but it felt forced. Even Alex seemed uneasy about how everything went down, even though he was trying to be supportive. He mentioned he was going to head out soon and asked if I was okay. I nodded and told him I was fine. He gave me a quick hug and left with a couple other people. I watched more guests start filtering out and realized the party was winding down earlier than Julian had planned. Kavya drove me home around midnight. The car was quiet except for the radio playing softly. She kept her eyes on the road but finally asked how I was feeling about everything. I stared out the window at the dark streets passing by. I told her honestly that I'd wanted Zoe to face consequences for months of making me feel terrible. But actually watching her cry and run out of the party felt worse than I'd expected it to. My voice cracked a little when I admitted I wasn't sure if that made me a good person or just someone who got what they wanted and now felt guilty about it. Kavya reached over and squeezed my hand. She said it was okay to have complicated feelings about it. She pulled up to my building and asked if I wanted her to come up. I shook my head and thanked her for the ride. I walked up to my apartment feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with being tired. My phone woke me up the next morning with a series of text notifications. I grabbed it and scrolled through messages from at least 7 different people in our friend group. Some of them were completely supportive, telling me Zoe had needed that wake-up call for a long time. Heather sent a long message saying she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself. 2 other friends said similar things about how Zoe's pick-me act had been annoying everyone. But then I got to messages from 3 people suggesting the public call-out had been too harsh. One girl I knew from psychology class wrote that she understood my frustration, but thought I could have handled it privately instead of letting it blow up at a party. Another friend said he felt bad for Zoe even though her behavior was wrong. I set my phone down and stared at my ceiling. The mixed reactions made my stomach hurt all over again. Nathan came over that afternoon. We sat on my couch and he immediately brought up what happened at the party. His face was serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing. He apologized for letting things get to that point with Zoe. He admitted he should have set clear boundaries with her months ago instead of just hoping she'd stop on her own. He said he kept thinking if he was nice enough she'd realize her behavior was inappropriate without him having to make it awkward. His voice got quieter when he said he was sorry for letting the tension build until it exploded publicly like that. I leaned against him and felt some of the weight in my chest ease up a little. At least Nathan and I were on the same page now, even if everything else felt messy. I took a deep breath and confessed something I'd been holding back. I told Nathan I'd deliberately befriended Alex partly to make Zoe jealous. I explained how I'd excluded her from girls' night specifically because I wanted to hurt her feelings the way she'd hurt mine. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. He stared at his hands, and I could see him processing what I'd just admitted. Finally, he said he understood why I did those things given how Zoe had treated me. But then he asked if I actually felt good about those choices now. His question hung in the air between us. I wanted to say yes immediately, but the word wouldn't come out. The truth was, I didn't feel as satisfied as I thought I would. Nathan kept looking at me with this patient expression waiting for my real answer. I finally admitted I didn't feel entirely good about my revenge tactics, even though Zoe's behavior had justified my anger. Nathan nodded slowly and said something that hit me hard. He pointed out we could both acknowledge that Zoe was wrong in how she treated me and our relationship, but we also had to recognize that I'd let myself become manipulative in response. He said that was something I needed to think about seriously. His words stung because they were true. I'd been so focused on making Zoe pay that I hadn't really thought about what kind of person I was becoming in the process. We sat together quietly for a while, just holding hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Heather later that evening. She wrote that Zoe had messaged her with what seemed like a genuine apology. According to Heather, the message admitted Zoe had been feeling insecure and taking it out on other women instead of dealing with her own issues. Zoe apparently asked if there was any way to fix things with the friend group. Heather wanted to know how I felt about that possibility. I read the message 3 times trying to figure out my honest reaction. Part of me was still angry and wanted to tell Heather that Zoe didn't deserve another chance, but another part of me remembered what Nathan had said about both of us needing to be better. I typed out a response to Heather telling her I needed time to process everything that happened. I wrote that I was open to Zoe apologizing directly to me if she was genuinely ready to change her behavior and treat people with respect. Then I added something that was hard to admit. I told Heather I hadn't been perfect in how I handled things either. I acknowledged I'd been working on being better about addressing problems directly, instead of through social games and manipulation. Heather responded with a heart emoji and said she thought that was really mature of me. I set my phone down feeling like maybe this whole mess could eventually lead to something better, even if it sucked getting there. 3 weeks passed and things slowly settled into a new normal. Zoe started keeping her distance from me and Nathan, but she'd show up to occasional group hangouts. When she did come around, she was noticeably different. She didn't make those constant comments putting other women down anymore. She actually asked people questions and listened to their answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. She stopped trying to prove she was cooler than everyone else. Nathan and I got stronger through everything that happened. We learned how to communicate better about boundaries and what we needed from each other. I became way more aware of my own capacity for being petty and manipulative when I felt threatened. That awareness made me work harder at handling conflict in healthier ways. Our friend group felt more genuine now without all the underlying tension. I caught myself genuinely laughing at Julian's dumb jokes during a game night and realized I was actually happy. My relationship felt solid and my friendships felt real. Getting to this point had been way messier than I wanted to admit, but I wouldn't take it back because it taught me things I needed to learn about myself.